So my name is Dave Liebenberg. I work at Talos. Talos is the threat intelligence arm of Cisco. I'm a senior threat analyst. I work on the threat interdiction team, and we try to track and obstruct threat actors. My team within that focuses on the Asia Pacific, and my work on that team focuses on China. The reason for that is I speak, read, write Chinese. I lived in China for about 3 years, and yeah, very happy to be here. Happy to be in St. Louis. Love this city. So thanks for having me. Today, I'm going to be discussing illicit Monero mining operations among Chinese cybercriminals. And in many ways, this represents sort of a shakeup or a diversification of an underground market that was predominantly geared towards DDoS, using a lot of the same tools and infrastructure that was used for DDoS for Monero mining purposes. Before I get started, I want to caveat that when I say Chinese, what I mean to say is Chinese speaking, since it is difficult to ascertain precisely where the adversary is, be it mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, diaspora, etc. Oh, can I use this too? So here's a brief outline of what we'll be talking about today. I'm going to start off discussing Monero mining basics and sort of Monero mining, why Monero became so popular. Then we're going to look at it from the Chinese side, how Chinese cybercriminals started getting into it and why. We'll look at examples of my work involves a lot of going through underground forums and Chinese social media. So we'll look at examples of chatter I found in there to exemplify this trend, and look at some screenshots of attacks that actors have posted, as well as tools that you can purchase on these forums. Then we'll flip it over from that adversary perspective and see how these attacks actually play out in some of our Talos honeypots. And then we will just to illustrate some of the scale and the profit that some of these botnets can bring in, I'll discuss some large Monero mining botnets that have been linked to Chinese-speaking cybercriminals. And I'll end with mitigations and takeaways. So, what is mining? High level. Mining is using system resources to solve large, complex mathematical equations that result in some amount of cryptocurrency being awarded to the solver. As an example, Bitcoin, one of the most popular, well-known cryptocurrencies, has been mined since its inception. Of course, nowadays, mining Bitcoin on a standard system is not feasible because it's so resource intensive, requiring something like an application-specific integrated circuit, or ASIC. But different cryptocurrencies are distinguished partly on the algorithm used to award the cryptocurrency to the solver. Some of these algorithms are designed in such a way to hinder the use of ASICs and to promote the use of mining on standard systems such as CPU or GPU. Currently, one of the more profitable cryptocurrencies that can be mined on standard systems is Monero. In addition, Monero, also known as XMR, is very privacy focused. And nowadays, as our government, domestic government, international governments have all become a little bit better at tracking Bitcoin transactions, threat actors have begun to favor the use of Monero. We can confirm that on several of the larger Russian exploit forums have switched from Bitcoin payment systems to Monero payment systems for that reason. There's a couple ways you can go about mining. On one hand, you can use a standalone miner, put it on your machine, have it run, starts generating cryptocurrency. Great. Or you could leverage pool-based mining. You could put that software on a bunch of different machines, have them all start generating revenue, have them linked together, and then you get all the revenue. So obviously, if you're only mining a little bit on a standalone, that's not going to be as good as mining a bunch on a bunch of different machines. A lot of these pool-based miners work on the command line. They require usually two main arguments. One, the mining pool URL, that's going to be where the revenue is going to be delivered to. And two, the worker ID or wallet that's going to tie all these miners on different machines together so the same user can get the revenue. There's additional arguments that you can put in. For example, you can specify how many cores used, sleep periods, hashing rates, things like that. Now, a threat actor, by adjusting some of these additional arguments, they can limit the amount of resources that would be being used on a victim machine. And by doing this, they can prevent the victim from noticing exactly what's going on. So Talos did some research earlier this year. We figured out that if you used a reasonable hashing rate that wouldn't alert anybody that all their resources are being drained, on a standard system, you can mine about 25 cents a day. Big deal, right? But if you're mining 25 cents a day on a lot of different machines, that can create kind of a tidy profit for you. So, now that we have talked about sort of why Monero has become more popular, I'd like to flip and talk a little bit more about the Chinese perspective. Now, the Chinese underground marketplace before Monero mining started taking off was really very focused on DDoS. And one of the most popular DDoS tools that people would buy is this one right here, which is called the Tianfa batch pressure testing tool. Tianfa is a group that I've researched and written about a lot, so they'll come up a lot in this presentation. Apologies for that. But it is one of the more popular tools that was used. This is basically your Swiss Army DDoS tool. Not pictured is a interface that allows you to scan and exploit, drop the Tianfa malware on the own machine. After that, you switch to this interface, and this right here provides a bunch of information about the bots that you are under your control, including their public IP, what country they're in, CPU information, etc. Down here, you can enter information about the target that you wish to attack, what port you want to hit them on, duration of attack, etc. And over here, you select what type of attack you want, be it SYN flood, UDP, or L7 attack, etc. So these types of tools are very popular. That wasn't the only thing you could do. You could also contract out a hit directly with the DDoS threat actor group. You could rent out a botnet, or what started becoming really popular in 2017 and throughout the rest of the year, throughout this year as well, is online booters. Online booters, which were very popular in the West, made their way over to China, and increasingly a lot of people started to use them because they're so much easier. Just create an account, start launching DDoS attacks. But whatever form it took, my main point is that it was predominantly focused on DDoS. Beginning in 2017, early 2017, and continuing right up through now, that began to change as we saw more and more people getting interested in the Monero mining fad. And there's a few reasons for why this is true. The first two aren't specific to China, but are more universal, responsible for a global trend we observed. The first one is simple. Monero increased in value. As the value skyrocketed, it became more profitable to mine it. The second reason is, from an adversary perspective, this is a largely hands-off infection to manage. You drop the miner on the victim machine, it starts generating revenue. From your perspective, you're done. There's no C2. And when we looked at, we saw globally that there was a trend away from ransomware, and that a lot of the infrastructure that was used for ransomware was now being used for Monero mining operations. And it's for this very reason. You do ransomware, there's so much that you have to be involved in. The customer might not pay. You might have to set up a customer service interaction apparatus to answer any questions they might have. If you hit something really bad, maybe law enforcement gets involved. Compare that to dropping a miner on a bunch of different machines and just pulling in thousands of dollars a day doing nothing. But ransomware was never the big issue in China. That was more DDoS. But here too, domestically, DDoS protection has increased dramatically. This is, and true for internationally as well, but I can confirm through my previous research on China DDoS that the biggest targets usually were domestic, and usually gray market services like porn, gambling, pirated game servers, etc. But these guys started having their DDoS protections increase too. And just as an example, China Unicom, a major state-owned telecom and ISP, recently actually partnered up with a Taiwanese company, Genie Networks, to dramatically focus on their DDoS improvement. Anecdotally, I can say that I've observed lots of actors talking about how targets that used to be easy to hit are now much more difficult with a mid-sized botnet. Now, on the other hand, you still have tons of DDoS tools for sale. You still have tons of exploit tools for sale to get you some bots. And you still have botnets left over from when they were using DDoS. These could all be transitioned to use for Monero mining purposes. This, combined with the previous two reasons, I believe, is why we have seen an increase in Chinese actors getting involved in this fad. Two big caveats before I continue. Number one, I do not want this presentation to suggest that DDoS has gone away in China. It has not. It is still a huge concern. Number two, Chinese actors will often use a spray and pray approach. So you will see the same attack dropping a miner and DDoS malware at the same time. And we'll see examples of that when I go to the Honeypot section. So in a minute, I'm going to discuss some of my findings in Chinese social media and forums, which are a little more anecdotal. But before I do, I wanted to offer something a little more concrete. I went to a very popular Chinese forum called Dute. Now, Dute is one of the premier Chinese underground marketplaces, very active user base, lots of daily new offerings. This, I would say, would be a place where a Chinese actor might check first if you want to buy a particular exploit tool, malware, DDoS tool, etc. Beginning in 2016 and continuing out through April 10th of 2018, I looked for posts that mentioned either DDoS or posts that were mining related. So in 2016, there were a whopping 291 posts that were related to DDoS topics. That dropped precipitously in 2017 to 125. And in 2018, as by April 10th, there were 34. Mining-related topics tell an opposite story. There was nothing in 2016. In 2017, there were 18. And by 2018, that's more than doubled. Even though it's only by April 10th, that's already doubled what there were in 2017. At this point, are actually more than DDoS-related topics. Now again, I want to stress, DDoS has not gone away. This has not supplanted DDoS. I think one of the reasons we see this huge decline here is the rise in popularity of online booters, which don't necessitate you to buy your own tools or malware on forums such as these. But either way, I think this illustrates that DDoS is, or that mining was growing in popularity in recent years. And I can also confirm this anecdotally in some of the observations I've seen in social media and underground forums, which I'm about to show you now. I'm not sure if they're going to make these slides available, but if so, these are the terms that I search on when I'm looking for in Chinese forums to find some of this stuff. I'm happy to share this out if not. Most of these are self-explanatory, except for a couple. One, Kuangma, translates literally to a mining Trojan. Well, it translates literally to mining horse, but it means mining Trojan. What they mean by this is a miner with the actor's wallet, hard-coded in it, implanted surreptitiously on a victim machine. So these mining Trojans and mining Trojan generators that make them represent the cornerstone of the illicit Monero mining market in China. Another term that might take some explanation is chou shui. That means dev fee. What they mean by that is either fees charged by exchanges or a tool that for some of the cryptocurrency it mines, it sends some of that back to the tool developer. And finally, Jichun, that means batch. Batch is something that manages a bunch of different things at once. This is a batch tool because you can manage all your different bots at once. And with that, we can start looking at what some of these guys are actually saying about this. So here's in a DDoS forum. This was a guy complaining that all of his Linux bots have been infected by other people's mining Trojans. Poor guy. So I've talked about the Tianfa tool. This guy right up here is the tool developer. His name's Mo Yi. Here he is noticing that XMR is fetching a good price right now. So he decides to use some of his vast infrastructure that he has to start mining, just to show that some of the big DDoS top guys were getting into it as well. So another thing I should mention is that anything you buy in an underground forum in China or that gets given to you in a group chat is backdoored. I guarantee it. It might be a backdoor from somebody who sold it to the middleman, or they might have put it in themselves, but that is backdoored. And that includes a lot of these mining Trojan generators. And we'll see a prime example of that when I talk to you about how I bought one and what happened when I did that. So I also started early on in 2017 just joining some of these standard normal mining forums. These guys weren't doing anything illicit. They were just, miner enthusiasts. And then all of a sudden all these malcontents from DDoS forums started joining in. So here's a guy talking about how his standalone version is so great, but Mr. Java pops in and says, hey, your standalone might be nice, but still not as good as owning some bots and using them to mine for you. And like I said, the legitimate mining community that all these DDoS actors sort of infiltrated were very unhappy. Here's a guy complaining, saying, hey, you can't use bots to mine, that's illegal. I don't think they cared. And if you're going to use a botnet to start mining, of course you have to know which kind of bots are best. Is it Windows? Is it Linux? The eternal debate among these actors. And you also have to know how much profits you're going to make. So this guy's saying that if you set up a high enough hash rate, you can make about $1 a day per bot. I think we could say that's probably a hash rate that's too high not to be noticed. One of the great things I love about my work is that Chinese-speaking actors love to post screenshots of ongoing attacks that they're doing, or screenshots of tools they're using. This is a great way for me to identify compromised hosts, and then see who they belong to. If they're a Cisco customer, I go ahead and inform them. That's some easy goodwill right there. And they love to post screenshots. Here's a guy posting a screenshot of him using an HTTP file server, HFS, to serve some XMRig miner onto some victims. XMRig is an open source CPU Monero miner. We'll be talking a little bit more about that later. And HFS is extremely popular among Chinese threat actors. I've observed Chinese rat building kits that have instructions on how to set up your own HFS. It's very, very common. In fact, here's another guy using HFS to download XMRig and some other unknown file onto some victims' machines. But here he is complaining that Linux speeds are too slow. Again, poor guy. Here are some of the tools that you can buy on a forum. Again, I talked about DuTe. It's a very popular forum. So this one says it's XMR mining batch. Remember batch, lots of tools at once. No backdoors edition. Yeah, right. This is a hot seller. I got hold of the source code and got rid of the backdoors, probably to put his own backdoor in. It says the Trojan uses LPK to infect. What this could be a reference to is a Chinese technique, bit of an older technique where you would name your malware lpk.dll after the Windows language pack file, that gets called by applications with user interface, some without. And you design it so it's spreadable throughout all directories of an application or a compressed file. This took advantage of Windows module loading, where it would look for lpk.dll in the applications directory. This was famously used in the Untitled botnet, which Windows wrote about in 2012. And actually, it's such a famous technique, there's even a page on it on the Chinese Wikipedia, Baidu Baike. It also says it's undetectable by AV. You'll see that a lot too, people claiming that it won't be detected by antivirus. I just wanted to give a quick comparison to show how similar some of these batch tools can be. They look very similar, except obviously for the DDoS one, you're entering your target info, and for the miner one, you're entering your pool info. Here's an example of another tool you can buy on the Honglan Anquanwang, they also called the HL0day. So this says this generates XMR miners. They're undetectable by AV. It has persistence. Remember to add a port, et cetera, et cetera. I know the picture's blurry, but if you see here, there has this kind of GUI, which is extremely common. Most of the tools that we saw were basically PE wrappers that would call xmrig with command line arguments supplied to the generator by the user through GUIs such as these. And through the GUIs, you could do things like enter a legitimate name for it to hide what it's actually doing, legitimate description of it. Here you would enter in your mining pool and your worker ID. And you could also kill other malware that was on the system. You could kill other miners that were already on the system, or you could just kill some legitimate services that were already on the system and generate your miner. And just note how in this screenshot we can see that the actor is using this in conjunction with an HTTP file server and a DDoS botnet management tool. Again, using a lot of different things all at the same time. So I actually went and bought one of these tools, and it was a huge hassle because the guy selling it to me did not accept Monero. That's right, the person selling me a Monero mining generator did not accept Monero as payment. In fact, he wouldn't take Bitcoin. He insisted that all we could use was a authorized Chinese payment system like Alipay or QQ Money or something like this. So after a lot of wrangling, we were finally able to organize that a middleman, through the use of a middleman, I was able to pay with Monero, got this tool. It was a RAR file called Monero mining generator.rar. I'm translating it. And it included, this mining generator, and I generated some miners. Great, right? Got what I paid for. No. Did I mention backdoors? So from this RAR file, another file is extracted and launched, the file name 1.exe. This is kind of blurry, I apologize. It checks for a file called netsys96.dll. If it doesn't find it, it downloads it from a Chinese IP. And this IP resolves to a domain shingugu.club registered to the man who sold me the tool. No honor among thieves. So now I'd like to switch gears here and talk about some observations we found from the TELUS honeypots. First honeypot we'll look at is our Apache Struts 2 honeypot, which had two vulnerabilities. 5638, which allows arbitrary command execution through crafted HTTP headers, and 9805, an XML deserialization vulnerability. I can confirm that Struts 2 is an extremely popular target among Chinese actors. For instance, within literally hours of 5638 being publicly disclosed, we saw Chinese actors in group chats and forums selling or giving out tools to their group chat members saying, use these exploit tools and go attack South Korea. The reason is right around the time that this got disclosed, South Korea deployed a US missile defense system. And basically, this particular vulnerability was used heavily in patriotic campaigns against South Korea. All right, so let's take a look at some examples from the Honeypot. Example number one is we can see the same sort of infrastructure being used to deliver both a miner and DDoS malware. What you see here is an extremely typical attack pattern among Chinese actors. Attempt to disable the firewalls, issue a wget request for the payload. As we can see here, the same IP has two payloads, as hosting two payloads, XMRAZ and Linux AZW. Okay, that's not too blurry. So XMRAZ was detected by by about 30 AV engines on VirusTotal as a coin miner. And in fact, it makes a DNS request to get.buy-chai.com, a Chinese mining site, which according to Cisco Umbrella was closely related to pool.minexmr.com and a few other mining sites. For those not familiar with the terminology, an umbrella closely related means requested with either a minute before or after the given domain and not frequently associated with any other domains. Linux AZW was detected by about 40 AV engines on VirusTotal, most describing it as a Linux DDoS backdoor. And that, in fact, made a DNS request to this Chinese domain, which ended up, after doing some research, being registered to a China DDoS actor. Just to give you an example of how common that attack pattern is among Chinese actors, here's a guy saying, what do I do after I own a Struts 2 thing? And then there's the command right there. This right here says Muma Dijer, or Trojan location. So it's literally just plug and play. And note how it says S2 here for our second example, which was a malicious file called s2.txt. We observed a download for this file, s2.txt. This was a malicious bash file. Determines the architecture of your system, 32-bit or 64-bit, depending on which. It will deliver either Boom Boom or Boom Boom 2, which is a coin miner. Makes a DNS request for pool.minexmr.com. If any of you follow Mario, that's a character named Boom Boom. And I inserted the Monero symbol right on his face. That's the only graphic contribution I've made to this entire presentation. We also have a web honeypot that has observed a series of attacks against the following: Oracle WebLogic CVE 10271. WebLogic, also a very popular target among Chinese-speaking actors. And this vulnerability is also an XML deserialization vulnerability. So again, here we can see the same infrastructure being used to deliver both DDoS and miner. So we observed about 3 IPs making a pulling down or requesting a file called transfer.sh from this domain, ipfsfutk.net. This turned out to be another malicious bash file. Tries to install some standard libraries, then requests and activates two payloads. One is miner D, which is a miner that mines Monero among other cryptocurrencies. And the other is Linux Sin, which is a Bill Gates DDoS variant. If you follow Chinese DDoS payloads at all, Bill Gates, extremely common. Bill Gates variants, extremely common dropped payload. We also observed, you may have heard of the Jenkins miner campaign. This campaign targeted vulnerable Jenkins servers, dropped Monero miners on them. And we can also confirm that this same campaign was also targeting WebLogic as well, because we observed it in our honeypots. And basically, post-exploit, they'd start up PowerShell. They'd keep Windows style hidden so it runs in the background. Set up a web client object, use it to download the miner, and then start the miner. From a telemetry perspective, I can confirm that We also saw that same IP hitting our customers on a lot of Chinese favorites. So not just Jenkins and WebLogic, they were also hitting our customers from JBoss, PHPMyAdmin, etc. Now this was not the only PowerShell campaign we witnessed in these WebLogic honeypots. We also observed another one. It was the source IPs of the exploits were widely geographically distributed. Here's a heat map to sort of demonstrate that. That's accurate as of March 29th. And as you can see, it's from all over the world, but mostly concentrated in mainland China. And what these guys would do after post-exploit is they start up PowerShell. They turn on no profile to prevent launching profile scripts, turn off non-I, prevent the creation of interactive prompts to alert the user what could be going on. They bypass PowerShell's script execution policy to prevent anything from tripping them up. Again, they keep the Windows style hidden, run in the background. Then it would decode this base64 blob. The base64 blob decoded to some more PowerShell commands. It set up an object OS that would get information about the operating system. It set up a web client object. It would set up HTTP headers. And it would set the user agent to PowerShell along with information gathered from the OS variable. And if you didn't have your HTTP headers crafted exactly like this, then you could not download the payload. The payload was hosted on this C2 as dl.php. dl.php. If you're wondering who that is, that's DL Hughley. Talos, we don't like to do attribution, but I'm very positive that he might be responsible for this. So dl.php executes an embedded PowerShell script, which then downloads a bunch more files from that same C2, including runexe.exe and x86.rc4. Runexe opens and reads x86.rc4, calls calloc twice because that x86 gets divided. The first 256 bytes appear to be an array that RC4 uses to decrypt the remainder of the file. The remainder of the file, you guessed it, the executable for xmrig. Again, from a telemetry perspective, we saw this same C2. We saw a bunch of files such as these downloaded onto our customers from that C2. In addition, you may have heard about WannaMine, a fileless Monero mining campaign that targeted Windows servers. It tried to use Mimikatz to nab credentials, and if that failed, it tried to use Eternal Blue to break in, hence the name WannaMine. Well, according to Chinese cybersecurity firm 360, there was a WannaMine C2 located at that same IP address. So that could suggest that the actors behind these campaigns are connected in some way. We also found 4 additional C2s for this campaign. 3 additional ones, sorry, 4 total. If anybody has any interest in getting those, I'm going to put my Twitter up at the end and my email at the end, so feel free to hit me up if you'd like those. So now I would just like to talk about some large Monero mining botnets that have been associated with Chinese threat actors. And I do this to illustrate how much money these can pull in, because when you hear about a machine mining 25 cents in a day, you think, how profitable can this really be? And also just to show the scale that some of these things can reach. So the first is Botnet, which was written about by Gardacore. For this campaign, there were some scanning servers in Hong Kong. They were using a scanning tool called WinEggDrop TCP scanner. Anybody who follows Chinese threat actors has probably come across the WinEggDrop tool before. It's extremely popular, both among just regular cybercriminals and APTs as well. There's a lot of different tools in that suite. But anyway, it would scan for all the Chinese favorites: phpMyAdmin, Tomcat, JBoss, MySQL, Struts 2, etc., Oracle WebLogic. And then it would exploit it, drop some Monero miners on it, and yeah. But basically, the point I want to make is this affected organizations throughout the world, including governments, city councils, Fortune 500s, etc. It had a very wide scale, and these guys were pulling in as late as February, I think, about 25K a week. Another extremely profitable botnet was MyKings. And this was written about by a bunch of different security companies. It goes by a lot of different names as well. I prefer MyKings because it's easier to say. And that's what some of the Chinese cybersecurity companies were calling it. But MyKings also targeted Windows servers, also used MS-17010, as a lot of different big Monero campaigns were. It relied on WMI, Windows Management Interface, as a fileless persistence mechanism. And according to Bleeping Computer, they quoted a NetLab researcher saying that this campaign may have infected over 1 million hosts. And as of February 2018, they had made $2.3 million in revenue. It's a lot of money. So, what does Talos do about it? Well, as you can see, we set up honeypots and we monitor honeypots. And this does a couple of things for us. One, it allows us to stay abreast of big campaigns, or see if big campaigns are targeting other vectors. For instance, the Jenkins miner thing, we can also confirm that that was hitting WebLogic from our honeypots, and from our telemetry, we can confirm they were hitting a bunch of other stuff as well. Then, from the attacks as well as the malware dropped, as long as other information that we obtain through Humint or open source, we're able to start blacklisting. We can blacklist the source IPs of the exploits. We can blacklist any C2s we find. We can blacklist any of the malware that's dropped. What we also do, so I'm part of the Asia Pacific team, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. We have Intel sharing partnerships with a lot of government organizations in Asia, as well as certs in Asia. We work very closely with them. And when we identify, let's say some malicious C2 or something, we can coordinate with some of the certs to get some infrastructure taken down, etc. Share information with them. If they have any information about that, they can share with us, which we can in turn use to protect our customers. I also mentioned that I get all these screenshots of infected hosts. Well, through that, I can do a lot of customer notifications, which not only builds goodwill for us, but it can also lead, depending on who the owner of the infrastructure is, into taking some of that infrastructure down. Finally, this is a plug for language analysts such as myself. A language analyst who's capable in OSINT can go ahead and buy tools, buy malware, know which forums to use, etc. Get these, and we can use this to write coverage. Sorry, I should also mention we wrote coverage, Snort and Clam AV. And buying these tools also helps us write coverage for Snort and Clam AV. Now, what can you do about it? Well, the first thing you should do is patch, especially if you're running something that is a favorite Chinese target. Tomcat, JBoss, Struts 2, Oracle WebLogic. If you're running any of these things, you want to patch as quickly as possible. Again, to go back to that example I had in the Struts 2 slide, within literally hours of 5638 being disclosed, we started huge exploit and scanning and exploit campaigns trying to hit everything. So it's very important to stay patched as soon as possible. Second, shut down unnecessary services. My colleague, Wick, over there, hey Wick, he found hundreds of thousands of anonymous FTP servers A lot of these were linked to consumer-grade devices, such as external hard drives that FTP enabled by default. Well, these guys were hosting over 1 million Monero miners, a lot of them related to a Monero mining campaign called Photo Miner. So always important to shut down unnecessary services so you're not hosting Monero mining malware. And again, I think it's important to mention that not all miners are malware. Mining has legitimate use cases. Pool-based mining has legitimate use cases. The minute it becomes illegitimate is when it's the question of consent. Do people know that their system resources are being used for mining? That is when it transitions into malware. Also, from an enterprise perspective, using any kind of system resources for mining might not be that great. So, before I get to Q&A, some big takeaways. There is a current trend toward illicit Monero mining. This is global. Part of it is an observed global shift away from ransomware to more Monero mining operations. And Chinese-speaking threat actors are getting into this. Part of the reason is that DDoS has become more difficult because of DDoS protection increasing, and you still have all this infrastructure used for DDoS purposes that could be easily transitioned into Monero mining purposes. We see lots of examples of this playing out. One, through chatter I observe in social media, underground forums, tools for sale, etc. And two, through our honeypots, we're seeing a bunch of attacks from Chinese-speaking threat actors as well. And finally, these botnets are making a lot of money, as is exemplified from the few I gave you there. There's others. For instance, that Jenkins miner, I forgot to mention this, Checkpoint also attributed them to a Chinese threat actor and described how they were making millions of dollars. And finally, language-capable analysts, by being able to buy tools and keep abreast of the newest trends, can really assist in these kind of investigations, protecting customers, etc. And with that, I'll either let you get to the next presentation you want to get to or answer some questions. Thank you. And let me just quickly mention that's my email up there and my Twitter handle. So if I don't get to you, feel free to hit me up that way. Back there. Yeah. I would think so. I haven't been paying that close attention to it yet, but I would assume so. Anything available to start dropping some Manera miners is going to get hit, for sure. Anybody else? Yes. From a NetFlow perspective, I'm not sure. Yeah, you look for those specific ports. You look for any calls out to those, mining pools. Keep a lookout at specific